Hi all, this will be the first video of our three-part blog. In this video we're going to look at creating our certificate cluster. We're also going to be doing the basic configurations of the DC. So within these videos we're going to be looking at doing a 802.1x security configuration for Cisco switches. This will allow you to make sure that the users that are connecting to your switches have to actually authenticate before any access to the port is granted. I have done a basic configuration of these servers beforehand, as I'm not going to cover how to do Active Directory and how to join computers to Active Directory. If that's something you need help with, the topic that we're going to be speaking about is going to be a bit too advanced for you, and I suggest going back and looking up how to do all of that stuff beforehand. So, let's get started. I'm going to give you a basic overview of what I've done so far, just so that you can get an understanding and you can create your lab so that you can keep on track with us. So, here we go. This is our domain controller. As you can see, we've got two main NICs that we're going to use. One is for our Iscsi, which we'll use for the certificate cluster shortly. The next one is the LAN. Obviously, we need to do that, and this remote one is purely for me so I can remote desktop onto these machines, as this is running in a virtual environment. We have created a domain. We've called it MPS local for ease. Computer name is DC1. There is nothing special about this. It's pretty much just a stock standard install of a domain controller, and we're just going forward for that. The next machine we're going to look at is going to be CA1 and CA2 over here. These machines are going to be our certificate cluster. We're mainly going to work on CA1 for now, and also the root CA, which is what's going to give us our standalone CA. So first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that our root CA is set up and ready to issue out some certificates. So here we go. Here's an RDP connection, which is not really the best way to do it, but in a lab environment it's okay. Normally what I would suggest is create this machine on a separate piece of hardware and use something like a USB stick to actually get the certificate off. But in a lab environment, I'm just going to connect to it like this for ease of use. So again, it's just a basic install. Server 2012. It's got data center on it, purely because you get more templates on data center that you can use. Very, very basic configuration for hardware resources, and other than that, nothing's really been done. Again, we've got one NIC, remote desktop enabled. An important part to note here is this machine is not part of the domain. It needs to sit on its own. Just to give you fair warning beforehand, I shall be pausing the videos in between installations, just to try and keep down the time and not waste your guys' time. So let's start. First thing you do, add some roles. Go next through here. Next. Select the server. When I look at this one here, Active Directory Certificate Services, so we check that. Next. Next again. And let it do its thing. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here until it completes. Okay, and we're back. As you can see here, the installation was successful. It also says source configuration required, which we'll get onto next. So we close this guy over here, click on this flag, and it's going to prompt us to configure our Active Directory Certificate Services. Okay, it's just asking us for a username. Go next through there. We want to do certificate authority. Go next through there. Given that this machine is not part of a domain we cannot do an enterprise CA, so the only option we've got is a standalone CA. Yes, we want it to be a root CA. We want to create a new private key. At this point, you can pick pretty much whatever you want here. I've never had an issue with 256, but I have done this before with SHA-512. It's all about whatever your company or business has decided what they want. Obviously, the higher you go, the more protection you get, but at the cost of CPU. Again, this is completely up to you. So this common name is what's going to appear on the certificate. Since we're creating a root CA for our domain, I suggest that in the distinguished name we actually put the domain that we're going to be using. So let's take away this part over here because we don't need that. We know exactly what root CA is. Here we go, DC equals NPS, comma, DC equals local, which is the name of our domain. We go next. For a standalone root CA, you want to give this a nice long expiration date, because we don't want to turn on this machine every few years and reissue our certificates. The whole point of this is that we give one certificate that lasts for a long time, and we turn this machine off, stick it on a USB stick, and put it in a safe somewhere, so that when the time comes to renew a certificate, we just take out that USB stick and renew a certificate from there. So we're going to give this one 20 years, which in all fairness, by the time it comes to renewing this, you're probably not even going to be using it anymore. This can be left at defaults, and let's do it. Again, I'm going to pause this now until it's finished. And we're back. Everything's working. Perfect. Close that. Click on a certificate services role. Check that it's there. There's no events. Nothing's failed. So open it up. Okay, green tick. We're good to go. So what we need to do now is we need to change our our CRL, sorry, and also where it looks for the certificate. So if we just right click on that and go to properties, inside here, let's just take a look at all these tabs just so you can get an overview of what's going on. Make sure I haven't changed anything. Okay, so the things that you're going to want to change here is one, the auditing. Since this is a very security sensitive thing, we want to audit everything. We're okay with this. And then under the extensions, so over here is where we get the CRL, which stands for Certificate Revocation List. This is where all other computers that are looking up to make sure that the certificate is valid know where to go and get the certificate. In this list also is the file where the server is going to publish the CRLs. So in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to take these CRL lists and we're going to place them onto our CA cluster in an HTTP path, so that all other servers can actually just go to that HTTP path, bring those CRLs down to themselves, do a lookup, and then carry on from there. Obviously, we're going to be, our root CA is going to be on a USB drive, it's going to be off, it's going to be on a safe, so there is no way that another computer could look up the CRL for the root CA. Point to take a note here is that root CA certificates do not have CRL lists on them. So this will only be for subordinate CAs, which we're going to issue out to our cluster. So what we need to do is these ones here, you cannot edit them, so we're going to get rid of them. The same as these ones over here. Again, you can't edit them, so we're going to get rid of them. remove, 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 remove. Let's add some more. Okay, so first one we're going to do is http /pkr.nps.local / this is root ca.crl. Okay, so we want to include this and include, so that makes sure that all certificates that this certificate server issues carry this CDP on it. Okay, now we need to tell it where to publish the certificates so that we can go and pick them up. So the easiest way to do this is to copy and paste, so that way we make sure nothing's wrong. Windows System 32 cert serve cert enroll. As you can see, there's already some stuff there, but we're going to change that shortly. /root ca.crl. Now, this root ca.crl can be anything you want. You can make it hellopony.crl if you really want. It's up to you, as long as it's the same over here. Here's what we tell it to publish the CRL and also publish Delta CRLs. For our root CA, we're going to make sure that Delta CRLs are not published because we don't really want to go and pick those up all the time, because the computers will complain if there are no Delta CRLs available when it does the lookup. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next one. Remove all of these also. Again, http /pkr.nps.local. Don't worry if you don't know what this is at the moment. We are going to create it later, so you'll get an idea of what it is in a little bit. Root ca.crt. So now this one is for the certificate. This is in case the computer doesn't actually have the root ca and it wants to check it to make sure that the server that it's trying to connect to actually comes from a valid root ca. Let's include that. We don't have an OCSP and I'm not covering that here, so we're not going to include that. Again, we need to make sure that we tell it where to put the file, root ca.crt. Okay. Now when we apply this, it's going to restart the certificate services. Say yes. Go OK. Now we need to go to the revoke certificate, right click on that, go to properties. Now the CRL publication interval, you want to make this also a relatively long period of time, because what we want here is we want to only take out a USB drive maybe every 5 years, plug it in, publish a new CRL list, and then copy that to our CA cluster. We don't want to be doing this every single week. The whole point of this is that it sits off in a safe. So make it a nice long period. I'm going to say 5 years. Again, we do not publish Delta CRLs. So we go OK. And what we need to do now is we need to now publish a new CRL with the new timestamp on it, so that when machines do see this, they'll go, okay, this CRL is valid for a very long period of time. So here we go. It's version number 2. next update, you can see that's in 2018, so that's a fairly long time. So now what we can do with this is we copy that, paste it, and rename it to just root CA. So now here's the two files that we're going to be needing to copy over to our new server. So let's pop this, new folder, copy over. So if you were doing this in an offline installation, what you do is now take this folder that contains those two files, pop them on a USB flash drive, and now we can move over onto CA1, which is the first server in our certificate server cluster. Please bear in mind that you do need to do this first, because when we publish the certificate for the CA, the first certificate server, you need to do a CRL lookup to make sure that the certificate is valid, and two, you actually need to issue the CA a subordinate CA certificate. So it's best just to have your root CA set up beforehand. So we're going to minimize this for now, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, here's our next server. It's called CA1. Again, nothing special about this one. It's just basically been set up. I've given it a little bit more resources just for recording. I've run these in production before with 1 gig of RAM, 1 CPU. They don't really do that much unless you got a lot of users doing certificate lookups. Over here we've got 3 network controllers. We've got one for LAN, one for Iscsi, and one for the cluster heartbeat. I haven't set these up, so I can show you. Again, nothing special. Just for convenience, I've turned this IE enhanced security off. Also make a note here that the Windows firewalls are on and they're completely default. I've done absolutely nothing to those at the moment. So first thing we need to do is get our networking set up and correct. So let's click on one of these. Just for beforehand, just so I know which ones are which, I've given a name to each one of these network controllers. So let's go ahead here and start with the clustered one. So we right click, properties. Okay, we're going to turn off IPv6 because we don't use it in this lab. And let's go to IPv4. Give it a static IP address. 10.255.254.1 and 248 for that, because we don't need a big subnet. Okay, so next thing we need to do is make sure you click on Advanced. This is quite important, so don't skip over this. Click on this DNS tab, and over here we've got a little tick box called Registered This Connection's Address in DNS. And basically what this is going to do, if you take that off, it'll make sure that whenever you do an NS lookup or something tries to do a DNS lookup for the name of the server, it's not going to give it the cluster IP address, or it's not going to give it the Iscsi IP address. We don't want clients connecting to it using those Iscsi or cluster addresses, because most of the time in production networks, those are isolated networks and you're not going to be able to get it to work, and it will cause you a headache. So let's finish up on that one, and now let's move over to the Iscsi. Again, we turn off IPv6. Give it a nice address here. I've got these written down beforehand. Oh, look at that, I've made a mistake. So let's cancel out of this and just go back quickly. This is on the wrong range. Now let's do this guy again. Okay, so here's our Iscsi network 254.2, 255. Again, we need to take that DNS tick box out, save ourselves a headache for later. We don't need a gateway, we also don't need any DNS because this is purely just going to be for Iscsi traffic. Close. Okay, so we're ready on that. That's looking good. Now we need to turn on our Iscsi service. So start Iscsi initiator. And this is only if you're going to be using a normal Microsoft one. If you're going to be using something else, you may require some drivers. So we start the service, go to configuration, and make sure we're going to need this shortly. Okay, so we don't have any target server set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my domain controller as my Iscsi target. This is purely for a lab environment. I would not suggest doing this in production, but since I don't have the equipment to do Iscsi target servers, we're just going to use the lab environment. Now this is completely up to you where you put this. Windows Server 2012 comes with a relatively good target server, so I'm going to show you how to quickly install it and just set it up. It does also support clustering, which is a bonus. So I'm just waiting for this to pop up quickly. Here we go. Click on this Iscsi part over here. I also haven't installed this service yet because I actually wanted to show you in the video how to do this. Okay, so you click on this little box over here, says to install Iscsi target server. Do it through the add and remove features wizard. So click on that, wait for the wizard to pop up. Okay, now we just work our way through the wizard. If you scroll down a little bit, there's what we're installing over there. Now you could do this beforehand to save yourself time. I purely didn't want to do it, so I could show you in the video how to do it. We don't need anything else, just next, install. Again, I'm going to pause the video here so that you don't have to worry about watching the blue line run across the screen. Okay, and we're back. I cheated a little bit, so I've gone and got myself a cup of coffee. Normally this install only takes about a minute or two, but if you check the times, you'll probably see it's by about 5 minutes. Okay, so if we close this, and we'll see over here, the text has changed. And now it says to create an Iscsi, start the Iscsi wizard, which is good for us. So if we click on that, wait for it to update a little bit. We don't need very big disks here. So as you can see, I've got barely any space, but that's no problem because we don't need a lot of space. So first one we're going to create is a CA-witness, which is going to be our Quorum Disk. So CA cluster witness, which will help in voting because we're only going to have 2. This can be a size of say 2 gigs. I have found an issue with this. You actually only need about 100 megs in total, but since Windows Server 2012 automatically changes this to a GPT partition, you need at least a gig if I'm not mistaken. So I usually give it 2 gigs, that way I don't run into any problems. Now we're going to make some ACLs to make sure that only the servers that we allow connect to the disks that we've provided for them, so that nobody else can snatch them. Okay, we're going to call this CA cluster servers. Servers in the CA cluster. Next. Oh, no spaces. So now I've done this in 2 separate ways, so I can show you each way of how to do this. Let's hope that this works quickly. So the first way is in server 2012, you can now do a lookup where it'll actually go and try and get this RQN from the server. Now I believe you need to have the service started before it'll actually be able to do the lookup, which is why I opened it up. So there we go. So the Iscsi service is started, so that way it can actually do a lookup on the RQN. Now if we do the next server, because we may as well do both at the same time, CA2, it's in the DNS, but this is going to fail. Apparently I lied. Well, that's good for us. Okay, not going to worry about any authentication. Again, in production environment, you probably want to set that up, but as it's a lab, I'm not going to worry about it. And then we have our first disk. So the next one is going to be our CA data. Data drive. Now this is the drive that the cluster is going to use to store the certificate authority database and logs. We're also going to use this to create the pkr.nps.local website. Now this one, you also again don't need a lot of space if you've got a very few amount of users. It can grow substantially, but this is something you're going to have to find out how much you need. I believe one certificate is about 64 kilobytes, so you're going to need a lot of certificates to fill up gigs of space. So in my space, I'm going to do 5 gigabytes. Since we've already created the ACL, we can just reuse that one. And there we go. So there's our disks created, and now let's go and connect them up. So back to CA1, we go to the Discover target, 10.255. I don't believe I've set this up on the DC. Oh wait, there you go, it's there. Just make sure it uses the right network controller. There we go. Okay. Okay. Targets. There's the one we want. So let's connect to that bad boy right there. Connected, volumes and devices, and this magic auto configure button. And there's our 2 disks. Perfect. So now we just go to File and Storage Services, Disks. Let's minimize this so it doesn't confuse us. And there's our 2 disks. Perfect. So let's bring them online and initialize them. As you can see, GPT and new volume. I like to give these the letter Q, but again, it's up to you. Okay, so that's our witness disk created. Now for our data disk. There we go, and new volume. Okay, we need to pay a little bit more attention in this one. The drive letter in this one is quite important because the drive letter is where you're going to put the database and the logs, and it needs to be the same on both servers. So we need to make sure that the drive letter we choose is available on both servers. In my case, I know that at least, let's say, the E drive is available on both servers, so I'm going to use that. I like to give it a name, CA data, and let it do its thing. Okay, so let's go set up a folder structure. I'm not sure why, but it hasn't taken this CA data name, so let's do it again. Here we go. Okay, we want a new folder. We're going to call this one CA data. We want another new folder. We're going to call this one Pkr web. And then we want one more new folder, and we're going to call this one CA backup, which you will see shortly. Okay, in the CA data, we're going to make a folder called DB, and another one called logs. And while we're at it, let's just copy that. Okay, so now that our structure is created, let's go and add the roles. So we click on Manage, add roles and features. Next, next, next. We want Active Directory, Certificate Services. And we also want IIS. If you feel more comfortable hosting this on a Linux machine, you're more than welcome to the web services or wherever you want them. I just like to keep them in the same place. Now, under the features, because we're doing a cluster, we need to enable failover clustering. And again, there's nothing else here that we really need. You see, there's nothing here besides the defaults. So we only want the certificate authority, IS, stock standard basics. Restart if required. Install. Again, I'm going to pause this while it does the install, and when it's finished, we'll be back. And we're back. Okay, here's the installation. It only took about 2 minutes to complete. Again, it's telling us configuration is required, installation succeeded. So All good. Okay, so first thing we need to do, we need to get our CA to the point where we need to issue a certificate. So let's configure that. Now, important point to note here, the credentials have to meet these requirements. To install the following roles services, you must belong to the Enterprise Admins group. Now, it's really important that you do that. So I'm going to show you where you can confirm that. So in your Active Directory, in Users and Computers, need to find the user that I'm using. And we've got a member of, as you can see, I'm a member of the domain admins and a member of enterprise admins. It is important that you have those machines there. So we meet the requirements, so we go to next. We only want to do the first one because it's the only one we've installed. Next. So this one, because it's part of the domain, it's going to be an enterprise CA. It is going to be a subordinate CA, which means we're going to issue it a certificate. And we need to create a new private key because this is the first server in our cluster. Again, this is up to you. We tick the box and we go next. Now, this part is important. You need to make sure that over here you put the CA cluster name that you're creating. In my case, I'm just going to go CA cluster 1 and then the distinguished name. So the CA cluster is going to be the name of the cluster once you're finished clustering them up. Bearing in mind that this certificate is going to get used by both servers at the same time. Again, you can make it whatever name you really want. Okay, so this is going to save our request file for us. Just make sure you know where that is. Next. Now this is the part where while we needed the disks pre-set up. So that's where our database location is going to be. And here's where our logs are going to be. Oh, got a trail on there. So that's it up. And now we go configure. So this is going to do its thing. And come back with a warning. So this warning is nothing to worry about. It's purely just telling you that you need to actually give it a certificate before it'll start its certificate services. So we're expecting that. Okay, so we close that. Now, before we issue out a certificate, we need to make sure that our Pkr website is working, because when you start the service for the CA, it's going to check a CRL to make sure that the certificate is not being already revoked. So let's get that set up before we go and issue out a certificate. So on our IIS, open up the console and minimize this. As you can see, my mouse is being a bit irritating. Okay, we don't want any of that. We're going to create a new website. Right click, add site. We're going to call this Pkr. Physical path is going to be on a cluster disk, so that whichever server is active in the cluster will be issuing out the disk for the CA. Okay, so there's our path. And our host name is going to be pkr.users nps.local. And we can remove the default site because we don't need that. Okay, please note this is not going to work right now. We first need to create the Pkr Dns record. So on our domain controller, we go to Dns Manager, we make a new CNAME for PKI, and then we're going to forward that currently to CA1. Now, take note that this name is going to bounce between the servers until we set up the cluster. So at the moment it's going to point to CA1, later it's going to point to CA2, and then after, when we're ready for it to go live, we're going to point it to the IP address of the certificate authority, so that whichever server is hosting our CA will also host the website at the same time. That way we don't have to worry about a single point of failure saying that CA1 is offline and all of a sudden now we can't do CRL lookups because the website is down. There are other ways you could do this, but this is the best way I found to do it, lab and actually in production. If any of you have spotted the DNS errors, there's nothing to worry about there. Those errors will pop up when you first set up your DNS controllers, normally moaning about waiting for Active Directory to start. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to quickly write up a test HTML document just so that we can make sure that the PKR site is working, and then when I come back we can quickly test that. And we're back. Okay, so I've just written a basic HTML page. There's the code, and I've popped it into our folder PKR web, which is what our IIS is hosting. And let's just make sure it works. There we go. So everything's working. Let's move on to the next bit. Don't need that anymore. So this page is purely there just to bring something up on a web browser for troubleshooting. Most of the time users will not use this. So what we need to do is we need to put in the certificates, which I have not put there, that we created on our root CA. If you remember this copy over folder, inside here we need these two. So copy that and pop that into this folder also. Paste. There we go. So you can copy that however you need to, either using a USB drive or just copy and paste to remote desktop consoles like I have. Okay, so our PKR site is now ready, which means our CA can do revocation list lookups. So let's move on to getting its certificates. So this is our request file, which we were given when we set up the server. So let's copy that over to our root CA. And let's just pop that on the, whoop, thank you for that mouse. Pop that onto our desktop. And then in our certificate console, I'm going to right click on this, all tasks, and go submit a new request. And it's on our desktop. These can sometimes take a little bit to appear, so don't be worried if it takes a minute or two to show up, but here is our request. If we right click on this, you got tasks, issue certificates. There is our certificate. Now let's take a look at the details. Here's the one we want. That all looks good. HTTP pkr nps.local/rootca.crt, and the same thing again, rootca.crl. So as you can see, we require these URLs to be set up before we go and start the certificate services. So now we just need to export it. If I jump past that too quickly, we just click on the copy to file button. You export it in whatever format you want, but I like to export it in the .p7b. Give it a file name. Again, I'm literally just going to pop it on the desktop and call this CA cluster. And save. Next. Finished. Export was successful, and as you can see, it's just popped up. Okay. We're nearly there for the first one. So, CA cluster, we're going to copy that. Again, you could do this off of a USB drive in a copy over file. You could copy all of this in one go if you wanted and put it into the Pkr web file, or you can do it in stages like I have. It's completely up to you, as long as it gets there. Now, I'm going to pop this again on the desktop, paste. You see this is CA1, and let's minimize this. Okay, what we want to do now is just add the root CA to the trusted third parties certificate database on this. So if you just right click on this, oh sorry, not right click, double click. As you can see, currently it says it's not trusted, so we install the certificate. Later on we can create a group policy so that all computers in the domain will trust us, but for now we're just going to do this manually. So local machine, and we're going to place this manually because for some reason for certificates it never does it in the right place. So trusted, root certificate authorities, okay, next, finished. Let's close that. And we want to install the CRL also, just for good measure. This one seems to go into the right place, so we just go next, next, finished, and done. Okay, we're nearly there on the first one. Now if we go back to the server manager, certificate services, right click on this, open up the certificate authority manager, minimize that again. As you can see, the service is currently stopped because it doesn't have a certificate. So if you right click on it, all tasks, install CA certificates. Go ahead and navigate to wherever you put it. In my case, I put it on the desktop, open it up, and it's installed, and let's try and start it. Hey, there we go. So our first CA is now installed. No errors, no anything. So that's it for the first one. I suppose now we're going to have to move on to the second one. There are a few areas that you'll get over here. I'll quickly discuss those. Sometimes the CA will fail to start because it can't do a CRL lookup. That's the most common one that you'll get. So what you can do is you can actually open up the certificates and again just go and make sure that the CRL distribution point is valid. Now you understand the reason why I put that index.html file there, just so that we can actually do a lookup using IE and we'll actually get something back, and make sure that's also valid. Now you can, if you want to, make sure that those are completely valid. If you don't trust that, oh, again, thank you, mouse. So if we type in one of those URLs, we will expect to have a file delivered to us. And there you see at the bottom, the file is getting delivered to us, so we know that's working. That is probably going to be your most common problem, is that the server purely cannot find that CRL distribution point. You can go past it, but I wouldn't recommend it. It does give you the option and say to you, do you want to ignore this? I would say no, don't ignore that. Go and fix that problem. It's only going to cause you a headache later. Okay, so if we're moving on to the next one, what we need to do is we need to stop the service so that we can release the disks. Let's close that for now. We also need to stop the website on the IIS because that'll also have a lock on the disks, and we don't want to break that. Stop. Here we go. And then while we're at it, let's put the disks offline. Take offline. Yes. Take offline. Yes. Okay, so now we are ready for server number 2. Here we go. And there's our basic setup for server number 2. As you can see, not much has been done on it. It's purely been put onto a domain. It's got the same NICs. It's got the same resources. On this one, I haven't even turned off IE enhanced security configuration. So I've pretty much done nothing but install it, give it an IP address, and add it to a domain. That is it. So I've already shown you in the first server how to set it up and get all the IP address running on it, all that fun stuff to install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, I'm going to run quickly through the basic installation and configuration steps, and when I come back I will give you an idea of what I've done. Something I probably should have mentioned in the beginning is that the operating system that you're running is Microsoft Windows Server 2012 Enterprise or Data Center. If you can, and you've already got the licensing for Data Center, I would suggest going with Data Center, purely based on the fact that you can issue out more certificate templates, but you have to at least have Enterprise because with standard you cannot do clustering. So you have to have at least enterprise or data center. I'll make sure that that is set up beforehand, else you're going to have a real big pain when it comes to setting up the clustering. Okay, so I'm going to pause it, I'm going to do the basic configuration, and when I come back I'll give you a quick rundown of what I've done. Okay, and we're back. Only took about 2 or 3 minutes there. Okay, as you can see, basic install is done. We've got the clustering set up, we've got the Iscsi set up, we've got our LAN set up, we've turned off IE enhanced security. I've also done our disks. So our disks are set up. I've also gone and installed the basic roles exactly the same as on the first server. So we've got our Active Directory certificate authority, we've got our failover clustering, and we've got our stock standard basic IIS setup. I've then gone into the disks. I've put the 2 disks I've got online and just made sure that they're using the same drive letters as they were on the first server. However, I've just remembered that I've forgotten something. So let's go back to take this guy offline. And we need to go back to server number 1. Bring this online. Certificate authority. What we've forgotten is to do a backup of the current CA. So if we start this, okay, so that's working. Right click and go all task, go back up to CA, next, and we want everything to be backed up. And we put it in a password there. Whenever you export a private key, it will ask you for a password. Okay, now we can stop that again. Close that. Oh, go back to that. File services, disks, and let's take this guy offline again. Okay, now let's go back to CA number 2. If we bring that back online on this side, go, so it's E drive. If we look in computer here, there's our 2 drives. Okay, so again, with this, we're going to set up the PKR first because the certificate authority is actually really quick and easy to run through on this one. So again, create a new site. No, we don't want that. Add website. PKI. Move that one. Now, something to remember on this is, again, this is not going to work straight away because we need to change the DNS so that it points to the new server. So back on our domain controller, got our DNS Manager up. and we just change that to CA2. Okay, and minimize this. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here purely to wait for DNS changes and replication, and just make sure that the new server is using the correct DNS IP address. Okay, and we're back. So if you do have a production environment and you've got more than one domain controller, sometimes you'd have to wait for Active Directory to replicate the DNS to make sure that both servers are, or all your servers have got the same IP address for this Pkr website. It can sometimes be a bit of a pain, but it's just one of the things that we have to do. When you think that it's ready, just do a ns lookup for PKI or PKI dot whatever domain name you're using, and just make sure it comes back with the correct alias and IP address. Once you've got the correct IP address, open up your Internet Explorer, make sure it's working, and there we go. So ours is working. It's using the same disk as we used on CA1, so all the files are already there. We've had to do nothing there. Okay, so now we need to do the certificates authority on this side. Again, it's going to be pretty much the same as we did on the first one. You replicate the settings, same username, same rules about enterprise admins. We go next, certificate authority. And we just go next, subordinate. So on this private key part, because we've already issued a CA certificate, we can use the existing one, which is why we actually needed to do the backup. So if we click on import here, look for the file that we backed up. There's our file. Put in our password. Go OK. Click on that file. Check the box and go next. Again, over here we've got to use the same path as we did on CA1. CA data, continue. Logs. So as you can see, there's our two files, folders. It will find a new, an existing database. We don't need that because we've issued nothing out of there, so we'll just go ahead and overwrite that and configure. There we go. So if we minimize this now, see everything's done there. Certificate services. Open up the manager. Hey presto, green tick. We like green ticks, everything's working. Okay, so there's nothing left to do there. Green ticks are good. So next thing we need to do is we need to pause the website, or stop it, should I say, and then set up the failover clustering. So you can do this from either one of the two servers, whichever one's easier for you. So inside tools, you will have a failover cluster manager. Just minimize that and just wait for it to pop up. There we go. And we want to create a cluster. You can read that if you want to. So here it's asking you which servers do you want to make in your cluster. So I've got 2 servers. Next. Do you want to run all the tests? Yes, I do. And here we go. There's the thing. These usually don't take very long. You want this to come back pretty much all green. Any reds, definitely don't want that. Any yellows, probably worth looking into to try and fix those before you go ahead and actually use this. Hoping to come back with all green. Gonna sit back and drink my coffee while this does its thing. While this is busy doing it, one thing to take note is you can see there it says validate Iscsi 3 persistent reservations. This is something that a lot of Iscsi storage units don't have, so you need to make sure that you've got one that's new enough that it does have it. This is especially important when you're also using Hyper-V. And nearly done. Oh dear, there's a red. So let's view that report and let's go see what's going on there. Validate RP configuration. Where's the red stuff? Okay, so there's our issue. So I believe this has something to do with the VMware environment that I'm running. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to pause the video, get that sorted, and rerun the tests and hope for all greens, and I'll see you when I'm done. Okay, we're back. Rerun the tests. Basically came down to the networks were not connected on the same virtual switches, which means they could not communicate. As you can see over here, all the tests, all green except for one. That RP configuration, basically what that's talking about there is that the cluster network NIC controllers don't have default gateways on them, so they wouldn't be able to route heartbeat connections. But since we've only got two and in the same subnet, same switch, they don't need to do any routing, so that's all okay. Okay, so now we need to give it a name. So here we're going to go CA cluster servers, and we're going to give it a IP address. Not on that one, not on that one, but on this one. This one will be number 6. Point to take note here is that the cluster name is the name of the cluster service, not of the certificate service that you're going to use. This is purely used for management of the cluster. As you'll see later, we will need another IP address, which will be the IP address for the clustered certificate service. Okay, so that's done. Let's just wait for this to come online. Let's check our nodes. Both nodes are up. Check our disks. Make sure it's using the right disk for the witness. So that's the correct one. And now we've got these cluster networks. What I normally do is I'll change the name of these so that they're easier to manage, and just make sure that all the settings are correct. So this one is for our LAN, and we would like to allow cluster network communication and also allow clients to connect through this network. Okay. This one is for Iscsi, so we do not want cluster communication there. It's purely for disks. And this one will be for our cluster, and we only want to allow clustering. We do not want to allow clients to connect through there. Okay, so we go cluster. So now when we go look at this, it's really easy to see which one you want, and you can just use those settings straight away. So let's just see if we've got any errors. Perfect, no errors. So we're nearly ready to roll. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to actually configure the CA servers to be clusterable. So if we go and configure role, next we're going to check this one here, generic service. Go next, and it's Active Directory Certificate Services. Next. Now this name is going to be the name for your certificate server. So CA cluster. In production you may want to call that something different, something more meaningful to yourself. This one is going to be 7. It'll also be worth writing all of these down so that you don't forget them. Documentation is key. So select storage. This is which disk it must use. So this is our 5 GB one. Next. We want to replicate some registry settings. We definitely want that. So let's show you where that is. Reg edit. run that as administrator, and it'll be under local machine, system, current control set, services. Let's move this out a little bit, scroll down, and we're looking for cert serve. So we want to copy that key name, pop that in there, take away the first part, and stick that in there. So that's the registry setting that we want to replicate. So those registry settings basically contain all the settings for the CA certificate, as well as the CDP information or the CRL, and also whether or not the certificate is trusted and is allowed to issue out certificates. So there's our overview of our settings, and let it do its thing. And there we go. Sorry, just waiting for this to come online. Okay, so we've had no problems over here getting this online. What I'm going to do quickly is I'm quickly going to run through a troubleshooting step, which is an issue that you might get should you have custom OU folders in your Active Directory, which is something that most companies will have. So in your Active Directory, you'll see over here the CA cluster and CA cluster server. So what's going to happen is this CA cluster server name needs to have create computer accounts onto the folder. So let's quickly create a new OU. So let's go test CA computers. And let's take a look at quickly property. Oh, we can't see that because we need to have the advanced view on. There we go. Properties, security. And what you would need to add in here is that CA cluster computer node. CA cluster server. And if we click on that, make sure that's selected, advanced. Let's wait for that to pop up. Again, while that's just waiting, if it's already running, you're not going to need to do this, but this is definitely something you need to keep your eyes on if you're running in production environments that are slightly different. Okay, so what we need to do is if we scroll down a little bit over here, create and delete computer objects. We go OK, OK, and OK. So just to recap, when this cluster server starts, the CA cluster server, this part, will create a computer object, that one, in the folder that it belongs, or the OU. And if it doesn't have rights to create that computer object, your service will not start and you'll get very obscure error messages. But they will give some indication of it is permissions issue within Active Directory and it can't create a computer account. So that's just something you need to keep your eyes on. Okay, so but we're rolling. We're nearly there. So what we need to do next is we need to now configure the CA in Active Directory to use the clustered service. And we also need to give permission to the two servers so that they can actually write templates and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so what we need to do is Active Directory, and we need to open up Active Directory Sites and Services. Wait for it to pop up here. There we go. So right click on it, we're going to go to Sites and Services. We want to view the Services node, Pkr. As you can see, they're all showing up over here. We need to give it security settings to all of them. As you can see, CA1 has got this one. So in this one, we'll need to add CA2. There we go. Full access. Same for this one. CA1. And full access. Full access. There we go. Enrollment services. So CA2 currently has, we need to give CA1. And that needs to be a computer account, so it needs to be changed. Okay. Here goes CA1, full access. KRA. Same thing again. Currently have CA1, so let's add CA2. Full access. Okay, so that is that. Nothing in there yet. As you see, there's a whole bunch of certificates that we can issue out. We'll see those again shortly. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go into Iscsi edit. And we want the default naming. Sorry, we want the configuration. Connect to that, and then drill down into PKI. Don't need all of that. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And we want these enrollment services. So if we've got properties, inside here you want the DNS name. So now this DNS name is where users and computers need to go to get their certificate. So we need to change this DNS name to CA cluster, and that name is the same name that you've given to this service over here. And we go apply, OK, and that's that. So we can close that now. We can turn off our root CA because we don't need that anymore. There we go, so that's gone. Now we just need to configure the rest of the settings in our CA. So CA number 2, currently running on node 2, so let's just open it up again, close that and reopen it. As you can see, it's shown up over here that it contains the clustered nodes. Okay, so we've got a problem over here. Probably just needs a refresh. I think we just need to basically move this about a little bit, just get both servers replicated. Move to okay, let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so we now need to change our settings, the same as what we did on our root CA. Our auditing, and all of that. And we also want to go to extensions, and as you can see, we've got all of this junk in here, which we don't really want. Okay, so let's remove that all. Let's go over here, remove all of that. Don't want that. And let's make some CDP. So http://pkr.ns.local/ca-cluster.crl. So these are the settings for our CA cluster, which is the certificates that our client computer is going to use or our client users are going to use. So they need to look up the CA cluster CRL because to them that is their root CA. So let's add that in, and we'll add for both of those. And now we need to create, again, where you want them to publish. In my case, I want them to publish in 2 different places. Windows System 32, search serve, search enroll. CA.crl. We want to publish and publish delta CRLs to this. And we also wanted to publish to e://pkr web /CA ca_cluster.crl, so that when it does publish a CRL, we don't have to manually go and move that file there. Whichever active CA at the time creates that CRL list, it will just publish them directly into the file that is going to do the HTTP site for us. Perfect. So now we've got those two. Let's move on to the next one. So let's add that because we've got that in there. So this is ca cluster.crt. Remember, this one's for the certificate. Okay. Another one, so /Pkr web./ca_cluster.crl, and one more. http://pki.nps.local/cluster.crl CRT. Remove that one because that one's got a CRL. PKI web /ca_cluster.crt. Okay, so let's make sure that everything's right. Let's have a read. That looks correct. 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 And that looks correct. Okay, so let's apply that. Yes, we want to restart our services. Okie dokie. So let's take a look at this. These CRL publication intervals is completely up to you. However, you need to work out how often you want this to publish. Remembering that these servers are always going to be online, so having shorter publication times is not necessarily a bad thing. If you're going to have a high volume of certificates coming in and out of the server, lots of certificates being revoked, say for when users leave a company and smart cards get taken out, you want those CRL lists to be published relatively often. However, if you are really going to do a high volume, I would recommend looking into setting up an OSCP server which will do online revocation list lookups. But for our case, 1 week, 1 day for Delta CRLs is perfect, so we've nothing to worry about there. Our certificate templates, these are all the basic ones which the server will issue out. Basic is good for us, that's all we need. But if you wanted to, right click on that and manage, and there is a list of templates that you could use. I'm not going to cover this in this video because it's a bit out of the scope. So that is our clustered CA. We are pretty much done with this. Let's do one last troubleshooting step and make sure that it moves over to the other server correctly. And it's running. So that, folks, is how to set up a clustered CA on server 2012. I think the only last thing we've got to do is actually see it issue out a certificate. So let's go into our domain controller here, because he's going to need some certificates for our next set of videos. PowerShell in MMC and bring up bring up an MMC. So I run PowerShell as administrator to bring up a admin version of MMC. Okay, so we want to go into here and go File and remove snap-ins, and we want to do a certificate for the local machine. As you can see, we have no certificate currently. And let's just see if everything works. Okay, so here are the certificates that we can actually issue. So let's go ahead and issue these three. And there we go. As you can see, the certificate service is working. And there are 3 certificates, each for different services. If we go back to our CA cluster, clearly not on that one. There are our certificates. And that is it. So good luck with that. I've realized at the end of the video that I still have not shown you how to do the Pkr website using the clustered IP address. So I'm just going to quickly go over through that again. So here we have CA2 and CA1 up and running on either side. As you can see, the Failover Cluster Manager is open and there is our service that is running. So what we need to check is that our IIS is running without any errors on both servers. As you can see, both servers are showing as up and running. So what we need to do now is we need to go back to our domain controller and open up the DNS Manager. Inside the DNS Manager, we will scroll down to our PKI entry and we will edit this so that the CNAME forwards to the cluster service name. Now what will happen is, even if one server is off and the other server is on, you will still be able to get to this website. This will help make your servers completely HA. There are different ways of going about this. Another way would be to host this on another machine and publish the certificates and CRL lists to a folder and get the machine to come and collect them every few minutes. That way, as soon as it's published, it'll automatically get shipped off to the web hosting server. However, that requires a lot of scripting, and I don't really feel like doing that, so this is just another way to do it. It's a bit of a dirty way, but it does work. So what we can do now is, if we go to our Internet Explorer, go to their website. There is our web page. So if we now go into server 1, and we move the role through to another server, and then on CA1, let's shut it down. So imagine the server's just been turned off. The Failover Cluster Manager has kicked in and said, oh dear, there's a problem. We're now going to move over to the next server. If we refresh that, we should hopefully get the page again. And there we go. So there's the page again. Here is a Control F5. So as you can see, it is highly available, which means that you should be able to get your files if either one of the servers is on.